Welcome to another edition of Shark City Unfiltered. I'm your host, Aaron James. I am extremely honored to introduce a very special guest on tonight's show. He is a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist. He is enshrined in the San Jose Sports Hall of Fame. He advocated for the construction of the Shark Tank. He covered the San Jose Sharks for the Mercury News and coined the term Los Tiburones. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the legendary Mark Purdy. Mark, how are you doing tonight?
Please, I am definitely not as awesome as as the way you introduced me, and it was a very dramatic music at the beginning, and I'm not sure I'll be able to live up to the drama, but I appreciate you having me on. And I still enjoy talking hockey, and particularly Sharks hockey. And I have to correct you. Yes, I did win a Pulitzer, but it was with a bunch of other people for our coverage of the 1989 World Series earthquake. So I always say I won one hundredth of a Pulitzer, but I'm still claiming it, right? But
Right.
I have to make that note. But
Fair enough.
yeah, so it's July. It's a great time to talk hockey, isn't it? It's just a great time to talk hockey.
Yes, it is. I am aware that you did it with a team, and I was going to do that a little bit later. But yes, let's show respect to the rest of the crew that was part of
Yeah,
that award-winning story. Absolutely.
yeah, yeah.
So, Mark, you're a man who needs no introduction. But for the fans that are new to Sharks territory, Mark Purdy provided some of the absolute best coverage in San Jose Sharks hockey during his time with the Mercury News, and he's also credited as being one of the driving forces behind turning San Jose into a major league sports city. So, Mark, I would like to begin the conversation by asking, now that the SAP Center is approaching its 30th anniversary season, how does it feel looking back at everything that was done into getting the Shark Tank in downtown San Jose?
Wow. Okay. We could talk about that if you want. I don't want to bore people with this because I know, most people, or probably many of your listeners, weren't familiar with how it all happened, and I don't want to go into all the details. But
We could
I
get the
think
Cliff Notes version.
when you contacted me the other day, that was very nice of you. Thanks, and I appreciate being on the show. I think I sent you a photo. You said you still, you know, care about hockey and all that, and I sent you a photo. I have in my study here at home. I have a groundbreaking shovel from the arena in 1990 that the mayor's office gave me because I guess they thought the obnoxious columns I wrote about that played a small part in getting that project done. I think but to sum up, probably many of your listeners don't realize how close San Jose was to not having an arena. It had to go to a public ballot in 1988, and all the polls showed it was trailing. But Mayor Tom McHenry at the time really stuck his neck out and really campaigned hard for it. I wrote a bunch of obnoxious columns saying, "Look, this is the time when San Jose has to decide whether it wants to be a city or a suburb." And cities have arenas like this where the residents can go and enjoy stuff there, concerts, sports, whatever. And fortunately enough, the voters bought that and passed it. But only then the arena was not built for the Sharks. The arena was built, and that's pretty amazing that the citizens here decided to go for it with no team guaranteed them. But once the project passed, then Mayor McHenry was able to go out with his staff and see about, well, what can we get a team to move here? And they checked the NBA, they checked the NHL, and lo and behold, the NHL was ready to expand. And there was, I'll make it real quick. There was a guy, there was a guy in Hollywood named Howard Baldwin who had owned the Hartford Whalers and gotten out of hockey. He wanted to get back in. So I was down in LA covering baseball, and I called this guy up and drove over to his office on Rodeo Drive and said, "So I hear you want to bring hockey to San Jose. What is that about?" And he did, and he had done his research, and he decided San Jose was the place for it. So he got the city to agree to make him the exclusive potential owner of a NHL franchise in San Jose. Problem was that the Gund brothers, who had owned the California Seals hockey team and subsequently ended up owning, after that franchise moved, ended up owning the Minnesota North Stars. Then they jumped in and said, no, you can't give any expansion franchise in the Bay Area to Howard Baldwin because we still own the Bay Area market. And so it looked for a while like it was going to get caught up in all this bureaucratic bullshit, I guess I can say on a podcast, right? But then Mr. Baldwin, I remember called me up and said, Mark, I have the global solution to this problem. The global solution, what does that mean? Well, the solution turned out to be he traded the rights to San Jose to the Gunn brothers in return for him buying the North Stars, which he subsequently sold to a guy named Green, and they moved to Dallas. So the Gunn brothers ended up with the Bay Area market, but they also looked at Oakland and San Francisco, but only San Jose was building an arena. So it was fortunate the Citizens decided to do that. And the Gunn brothers signed a deal with the Sharks. And that's how the Sharks signed a deal with San Jose, rather. And that's how the NHL came to San Jose. And I don't know how many young people care about that now. I think they've just always assumed they could go to a Sharks game in San Jose, but it was close to not happening. That vote didn't pass by a whole lot, but it makes your original question was how does it look 30 years on? And you know what? I'll tell you what makes me feel good, Aaron, and then I'll shut up. Is when I go to a Sharks game and I walk around the concourse and I see people from all over San Jose and the South Bay and the Bay Area walking around with their families, with their buddies, with their bachelorettes, with people who are, that concourse kind of becomes like a town square between periods, right? And you walk and you see all the different people, the different kinds of people that live here in the Bay Area, and see them enjoying themselves in an event like a Sharks game. That's what makes me feel good.
Okay, Mark, thank you for sharing that. Okay, I just want to say this right off the bat. First and foremost, in terms of your comments with the young people and not sure if there'd be any interest in the story, I firmly believe that San Jose Sharks fans, no matter what the age is, especially today with digital content and everything out there, they just always want more. And what we rarely hear these days are these stories from individuals who also play their part in bringing San Jose hockey here to the South Bay. So we are honored to have you on the program. There's nothing you'll say tonight that will not be interesting to the audience. I promise you. Okay.
All right.
So
well, thanks. You're making me blush, but yes, thanks. Yeah. I think it's important for people to know that stuff because stuff doesn't just happen. People have to get involved. And I, there were a lot of people besides Mayor McHenry and myself who worked to make this happen. I want to make that clear too. And, it just makes me feel good. And isn't it amazing, Aaron? Now it's the second oldest arena in the league, right?
yes,
Behind Calgary, it's crazy. It's just crazy.
it is. And actually, it's kind of ironic because the Shark Tank has kind of been subject to some of the conversations going on with some of the projects going on downtown, and a lot of questions in terms of how all that may affect the games. Or not going to dive too much into that tonight because but I feel you. There is kind of like, it's rare that people take a step back and realize that we didn't always have the tank. And hey, even though the Sharks have been here for going on their 33rd year now in the league, and we've obviously enjoyed plenty of seasons, which I hope we get to talk about in a little bit. It hasn't always been there. And again, I find true value in hearing the people who are there, ground zero or groundbreaking in your case with this great award. And, it's just an honor again to have you. So,
oh, please. That's very nice of you to say
thank
that.
you.
Thanks.
Yes, Mark. So
let's talk. Yeah, let's talk. What do you mean? Yeah, I'm curious to see, and that's the other part of you ask, what is it like looking back? And I'm kind of curious to see how the story ends. I'd hoped before I died, I'm 71 years old, that I would see a Stanley Cup in San Jose. I'm still holding out hope, but it's no matter what, it's been a gas to have that team here, and the storylines they provided for me as a journalist were terrific, and I just as I would cover all those playoff runs, Aaron, and and not every player and I got along, right?
Mm-hmm.
And some of them didn't like what he wrote, which was fine. Some did, which was fine. But I'd go to the playoffs and these guys go, "Are you going to write this? This crap?" I said, "Look, you're writing the story. I'm just transcribing." just write me a different ending than we've had, right? Which
Okay.
is,
Yes,
which
absolutely.
is we go kind of far in the playoffs, and then you guys lose, and I have to write that year after year. And one year I remember that the year they did make the finals, and it was the same. And your listeners may remember this. It was a lot of that was a great couple of months because the Warriors were also going to the NBA finals. So like every other night, you had either the Sharks or the Warriors playing, and they were both on the track. And so at the beginning of that, I had to choose. Well, do I want to write about hockey and follow the Sharks through this journey, or do I want to write about the Warriors? Fortunately, I had another columnist at the Mercury News, Tim Kawakami, who loved the NBA and really knew the NBA and wanted to do that. And I said, well, I'd like to, because I want to see how the story ends, right? So I'm going to stick with the NHL. So I'm in at the start of all this, I'm in the dressing room one day, and Brent Burns comes up and goes, so you're gonna cover us instead of the Warriors in the spring? And I said, yeah, I'd rather do that. And I just want to see how this ends, and just promise me. I would always say this to them every year. Promise me you'll win enough playoff games and stay alive long enough so I don't have to cover the NFL draft, because one of the things I hated covering the NFL draft. It's the biggest bunch of baloney and meaningless words and everything. And Brent says to me, well, I don't know when the NHL draft is, but we're going to be playing a long time. I said, okay, you promise. And they made it all the way to the finals, which was, so it became kind of a running joke through the playoffs. Like, you're still alive, I don't, and you prevented me from the draft, the NFL draft. So I owed them that way. Anyway.
Okay, so speaking of your your writing, a lot of fans, especially some of the newer fans, may not be aware of this, but and I'm just declaring this right now, you coined the term Los Tiburones. So
yes,
in your own words, can you tell us what it was like seeing the phrase, which wasn't always popular, go from print to practice jersey?
That was very bizarre. And, I don't know if I coined the phrase. It's the Spanish translation for the Sharks, right? It's, it didn't seem to be. I'll tell you how it happened. I'll try to make it quick. So I mentioned, okay, so there was no team coming to, there was no guarantee there was a team going to play in the arena. So finally, San Jose and the NHL and the Gunn brothers signed this deal. Okay, we're going to have a team. But then nobody knew what the name was going to be for a while, and they had a contest, and they, and finally they have I don't know if they even had a press conference. So they just put out an announcement. Okay, the team's going to be called the Sharks. So I got to write a column about that. But how do you write a column about a team nickname being announced, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm at the office, and as a hockey fan, and as your listeners who are hockey fans know, a lot of teams have secondary nicknames, like the Montreal Canadiens or Les Habitants in French, right? The Habs, and the Oilers are the Oil. And so I'm thinking, well, okay, so we got a nickname, but don't have a team. But what maybe they could have a secondary nickname. And the guy named Pedro Gomez was working at the Mercury News at that time, who later went on to be a really great baseball writer and worked for ESPN a long time covering baseball for them. Sadly, he's passed away. But anyway, so Pedro's in the office, and I said, well, if in Montreal, the second language there is French, and they call the team Les Habitants, the Habs. I said, San Jose is a Spanish name. I said to Pedro, what's the Spanish word for sharks? And he said, Los Tiburones. And I said, that's it. You got it. And so I think from that very first column, I referred to them on second reference or third reference as, the beloved Los Tiburones. And you're right. A lot of people hated it. But I kept pounding it. And I would it was so funny. I'd get like emails, or back in the day, letters saying, you should only use English. The Sharks, you calling the Sharks the English. And so I would always respond, well, okay, that's fine. If you can get the the city to change its name to St. Joe, then we can call it the St. Joe Sharks. But it's San Jose, so it should be Los Tiburones de San Jose, and it was just kind of fun to play with, and more people hated it. And then all of a sudden, one year, how long was that? Go like 2015 or so.
Mhm.
The Sharks called me up. Scott Emmer of the Sharks called me up and said, "Hey, guess what? We're thinking of doing a Los Tiburones night and having Los Tiburones jerseys and do you object?" I said, "Well, I don't think it's not my place to object. All it is can you copyright a translation? I don't think you can." I said, "That'd be great. The only thing I'd ask is I'd like a jersey, you know." and
Did they
uh,
give you a jersey that was like practice quality, or was it a jersey?
well, the first year it was a jersey. Well, it
Oh
was
my goodness.
it was the giveaway. It was the giveaway jersey. That was okay. The second year, then it happened to be like after I'd retired, and they did a very nice thing. Um, they asked me to drop the puck on Los Tiburones night, which I agreed to do only if the guy who designed the jersey, who was a really cool guy, and also happened to be of Latino heritage. And I said, if I can drop it with him, I won't. I don't want to do it by myself, but if I can drop it with him, because he deserves credit for this stuff too. And so they they had us go out and drop the puck, and that night um, the Sharks gave me one of the real, Los Tiburones jerseys, which I still have. But every year when they have that promotion, I ping them. If I'm not attending the game myself, I do share season tickets with 3 other guys, so I'm at like 10 or 11 games. If I'm not attending that, I ask them, give me a copy of the promotional jersey, so I have those all lined up in my closet.
Nice.
But yeah, I'll admit it's pretty fun, and I will say, whenever I'm walking around and I see people wearing those jerseys, I'll stop and point to them and go like, "I love your jersey." Love your. I don't think they know who I am. But they go, "Oh, thanks." Love that jersey.
What a
Because
feeling.
because it's fun. Going to sports is supposed to be fun. It's fun to have that part of the franchise be recognized. Because the city does have a Spanish name, and of course a lot of Latino people live here.
Mhm.
People with Latino heritage, and
I'm included. Just by the way, I'm
okay.
included. So
Hey, gracias for bringing that up, and I hope people take it with the spirit is intended, which is this is part of the city's mojo, and it's fun, and viva los tiburones, right?
absolutely, Mark. I mean, it's part of Sharks fan culture at
Mhm.
this point.
Yeah.
So now that we've covered your contributions to the hockey scene here in the South Bay, let's talk about some of those San Jose Sharks teams.
Oh
Um,
boy.
First,
Sure.
I'll keep it. I'll do an easy one here. What was it
Yeah.
like being at those pressers and locker rooms and everywhere else in between with some of the greatest players in Sharks franchise history?
Well, I grew up, Aaron. I grew up in the Midwest with minor league hockey. I grew up in a very small town in Ohio that was kind of halfway between Fort Wayne, where the Fort Wayne Comets played, and Dayton, Ohio, where the Dayton Gems played when they were in the International Hockey League. And so, I knew hockey. I had not really covered it in deep. I'd covered hockey games, and I covered. I feel blessed. I covered the most exciting, greatest hockey game ever, in my opinion. The 1980 Winter Olympics game in Lake Placid, where the USA upset the Soviet Union.
The
Um,
Miracle on Ice.
Miracle on Ice. Yeah, that was a really remarkable place
That's
to be that night.
amazing.
Yeah. Well, I'm really old, Aaron.
No,
so
no, no.
yeah, so I'm not having fun.
Not trying to make that point, but yes, thank you for having fun. But just
Yeah,
curious, since you bring that up, how were you covering that event and what capacity?
I was working and then in Cincinnati at the Cincinnati Enquirer.
Mhm.
I was been 26 some years old, and they sent me to the Winter Olympics. It was which was my first Olympics. Incidentally, I covered 14 Olympics. So that was the first one, and what a first one to cover with that. And so that was, we could do a whole show on that. But
Mhm.
so anyway, your question though was about covering the Sharks. So I knew hockey, but I didn't know hockey personnel. I didn't know people that well, and so that very first year, very first season, I joined a hockey NHL fantasy league. So I would get to know, the league and the players. And I knew some Canadian hockey writers through like covering the Olympics and covering different stuff, and they said, "Well, you're going to love covering hockey because these guys, they're really honest and accountable, and they really, many of them are from small towns in Canada. There might not be the most, they didn't go to college and study, European history, and they're not going to, it's interesting. You can tell, like particularly in a baseball locker room or in a football locker room, the guys that went to college and really got into something. Hockey players just are all kind of, kind of, I don't know. They have an ethic that I was told I would come to admire, and I did. But they said, keep your notebook out at all times, and you'll learn stuff, and that made sense to me. So, that first Sharks team had all kinds of different people
Mhm.
that were kind of the leftovers from some teams, and then some of them were from that Minnesota franchise that the Guns had previously owned. And
Yeah, our franchise is not as fortunate as some of these newer ones, that's for sure.
that's exactly right. But the Sharks, we could talk about that too. The Gunn brothers negotiated themselves into a less position because they were convinced, because they'd owned that Minnesota franchise, that they had developed, they had in their system some great players. So the deal they cut with the NHL was, okay, we'll give up the first draft pick, which was going to be Eric Lindros, if you give us like basically half the Minnesota farm system.
Mhm.
And that turned out to be a really bad decision because they didn't get that many guys from that Minnesota farm system that became great NHL players. I think maybe the only one you would say would be Archer Zerbe.
Mhm.
But there were some good players and good guys. Rob Zettler was in that group. Neil Wilkinson. But there's a guy named Link Gates. Do you know that name? Who was a complete,
Yes.
yeah, okay.
Yes. How
An
don't you?
enforcer, right? An enforcer
Yes.
who I remember when they announced these are the guys from Minnesota were getting the Sharks chief scout Chuck Grill says, this guy's the meanest guy in hockey. I said, well, I got to write about him, and I found out, yeah, he'd shot out a church window somewhere, and he it was so he but he became a fan favorite, right? And so walking through that door, and here's what I found is, if you were around and you could start a conversation with these guys, you are going to find out interesting stuff. And those early teams, I don't think there was a superstar, right? The first superstar they ever really had was Patrick Marleau.
Mhm.
And Patrick was so young when he came here, Aaron. It was just and he was so good, but he didn't realize how good he was because he was a kid, and you could tell he was a little, on edge, and I don't want to say intimidated, but in the culture of hockey, the young guys have to defer to the veterans, and the and the and the and in the culture of hockey, people will take runs at them, right? I mean, I know whenever some of these young guys come up now for the Sharks, other guys in the league are going to take runs at him, right? I mean, remember
Mhm.
what happened to Thomas Hertl, where he scores 4 goals, and the next thing you know, they're running at him and end up, in fact, injuring him, right?
Right.
Um, so Patrick, uh, once he realized that, yes, I am 6'3" or 6'2" or whatever, and I can compete, then you could. It was really interesting to watch him mature in that. But those first couple of years, Daryl Sutter was the coach, and Daryl was not one to coddle anybody. And I remember he would scratch Patrick a lot, and including, I remember one. This is how young Patrick was, right? And because I think he was 17 when he first showed up at camp. He turned 18 right before the regular season started. But there was a playoff game in St. Louis, and Patrick was scratched because he just, he wasn't ready to play at that level in the playoffs. And he's sitting in the press box before the game playing the Game Boy.
Oh,
you
wow.
know, yeah, And I said, So what's more interesting, that or playing the game? He said, "Oh, I'd like to play in the game," right? But meanwhile, it was so apparent he was an 18-year-old kid doing that. And I have to say, getting to know Patrick over all those years he played with the team, and especially as the team got better and made the playoffs, and then he went to the Olympics a couple times, and I was there covering him in the Olympics, and really kind of got to know him there because away from the Sharks, there's this dynamic in the locker room. Nobody wants to. It isn't like some other sports where a guy will step out and say, "Yeah, I'm the guy," right? Everybody kind of has to fit into the hockey culture. And so Patrick, it was hard to draw stuff out of him, but you get him away from that, like at the Olympics, and he was more willing to open up, I think. And I always, he was not the most colorful quote. He was not, a great storyteller. But if you stuck with him and you found the right questions to ask, he educated me a lot about hockey. I remember one time when the rules changed after the strike, and they were going to have the idea was to showcase the skills of these guys more. I asked Patrick, I said, "Okay, can you sit down and we'll watch some tape and you tell me like what you'll be able to do this year, this season that you won't be able to do on that?" Because the NHL had sent out a tape that, okay, this is the way we're going to call games now. And that was a really instructive thing for me to sit there and have a guy of that caliber explain, okay, here's what I can do now. I can't do this. I have to do this. And I always appreciated that. As a journalist, you're not a fan, but you admire and respect someone professionally, and that was I think the kind of relationship I developed with Patrick and other guys too. Every guy has his own quirks. Joe Thornton, I always appreciate about him is like after every game, no matter what happened, he was always at his locker. He was always at his locker, sometimes undressed. Right? How'd you get out of your uniform that quickly, right?
Typical Joe Thornton fashion.
He wanted to get that out of the way, which was good. Especially when we're on a deadline. And he would be ready, so you better be ready. Joe's going to be ready to talk right after the game, and you better have your questions ready and that. And Joe, if you get him going on the topic you wanted to talk about, he was really good too. I'm really happy he's chosen to make his home here in San Jose, at least semi-permanently. And it would be really, it's great that he decided to do that, because I think that'll help the organization, and because I know he can't stay away from the rink, right? And being around town, that'll be good too. But the guys those are the two superstars, right? We had here in San Jose. But the characters I'm going to remember are, of course, those guys, but also guys like Link Gates, or a guy like Sean Burr. I don't know if you remember him, or Mike Vernon's going in the Hall of Fame. Mike Vernon, the goalie. And he was a real character and an interesting guy too. I remember we were in Japan. The Sharks opened the season in Japan once, and they had to go through some ceremony at the embassy, and had to break open a sake bucket or something, and they chose Mike Vernon to be the guy that was going to break the thing. So he's standing there, and he's got this big like ribbon, like round ribbon with the thing, and they put on for the ceremony. And I walk into the place, and he looks at me, and I look at him, and he goes like, "I think I won a pie eating contest." This ribbon, right? And that was also the trip where another guy I got to know pretty well was Mike Rathje. Do you remember him? And because he'd been here, he was here for a long time, and he went through an interesting journey as a player. And that was there were only a couple times, so I almost I was worried about physicality, let's put it that way. And one was that trip, because Mike had chosen he had held out for his contract, so he didn't make the trip over there, but he signed like while the team was over there, so he flew there on his own to meet up with him. and I had written something about what a bad idea it was for him to hold out, and he must have gotten bad advice and taken it, or he just doesn't understand why it's a bad idea to hold out in this situation. I can't remember all the details. Sometimes it's a good idea to hold out, but this was not. Anyway, so I walk into an Irish bar in Tokyo, and with Vic Chi, who was covering the team at that time, and I said, "How do you know where an Irish bar is in Tokyo?" He knew. So we go in, and oh no, well, there's like 6 or 7 sharks in there. Never like to go a place where the players are, having their fun, because they're allowed to do that on their own. And I don't, they don't need me there to, maybe write about something they don't.
Right. Understood.
You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So, but we go in there and say, well, let's just sit down and have a drink. Okay. So we're sitting in the corner, and a guy named Joe Murphy was on the team, and he wore a kimono there. It was crazy. But now Ratsy walks in, Mike walks in, and he comes down and sits next to me in this booth, and he just starts like elbowing me and sitting next to me. Hi Rat, how you doing? I want a beer. He goes like, you got to stop writing that shit about me, And I said, okay, we can talk about that man to man. I'll always do that. But what exactly did I write that you object to? He goes, well, I didn't read it, but Drew Remenda told me that you wrote this. I said, Drew told you? I said, look, Mike, I have 2 rules, and I like Mike. I have 2 rules. I'm happy to talk about anything I write about somebody, eye to eye, if you have something you object to. But the second rule is you got to read it first.
Right.
And so it was okay after that, and it remained okay. I think Mike still lives in town. I don't see him as much as I used to. Obviously, I've been retired. But you what you hope to do is develop such a relationship with these guys so that they respect you professionally, because I certainly respect them professionally, and along the way you get to write some really interesting stuff about interesting people. But you've also got to learn this, Aaron. I'll tell one more quick story about how I learned. Hockey players will lie to you about injuries, particularly about injuries, right? They will lie to you about injuries.
Right.
And so there's playoffs one year. Jeff Friesen was their leading scorer. And if you remember Jeff Friesen, was a really good player.
Yeah, number 39. He ended up going to New Jersey and winning the cup.
Correct. And so he had been leading team scoring, but in the playoffs, he was not doing really great at all. He couldn't put the puck in the net for a reason. He wasn't skating well. And so I'm going to write this column about that, and the Sharks can't win unless this guy picks it up and starts scoring, right? But I believe strongly if you're going to do something like that, you go to the player first, or whoever you're writing about, coach, and say, look, this is what I'm seeing. Tell me your side of this, and particularly tell me if you're hurt. Is an injury affecting this? I don't need to write exactly what the injury is, or even maybe write you have an injury, but I need to know to try to be fair to you. And so I went to Jeff and I said, what's the deal? Why aren't you scoring? And he, get bucked up and said, well, I need to do better. I said, well, listen, Jeff, you got to tell me if you're hurt. If you're hurt, I can cut you a break on this, and people need to know, or I can kind of write between the lines and let people know. And he said, no, I'm fine. Everything's good. I'm sure whatever you write will be, merited. I'm just not doing it. Blah, 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 blah. So I do write the column. Sharks can't win unless this guy picks it up, and he's not. He's I don't know if he's stinking up the joint, but the Sharks need more from him, and he's not giving it to him, and he needs to be called for account for that. So Sharks end up losing that series, and again, this is another cautionary tale, right? So after the elimination game, it was at home. One of my friends said, well, let's go down to Henry's High Life and have a beer. Season's over. And okay, yeah, all right. I'd rather get home, but okay, sure. So we go in there, and again, too many Sharks are in the place. And I think Brian Marchment, who's another interesting character, is like behind the bar, tending bar.
Yeah, it's the late great Brian Marchment, by the way.
Yeah, and so Sean Burr, who was on that team, and was a character and a big physical guy, and would, he'd like to scrap. So it's packed, and I'm kind of over in the corner of the beer, and John Burr walks up to me, he gets right in my face, says, "Why you write that crap about Jeff Friesen? That was really unfair. Don't you know he's hurt?" I said, "Sean, I asked him if he's hurt. He said he wasn't,
Right.
You can go ask him, And Sean says to me, "Don't you realize we're going to lie to you about that every time?"
Yes.
I said, "Well, I didn't write that down in my notebook, Sean, but now I'll realize I won't, I'll realize I can't trust you guys." He goes, "No, you can't trust us." And then fortunately Jeff saw what was going on, and he came over and he said, "No, Sean, things are cool." So I learned that, right? That's part of the hockey code too. And I think what a lot of fans don't realize when they're critical, and I was critical when I needed to be, I thought, is that, the coach, there's always more going on than you know, right? And it was frustrating for me to not be able to dig a lot of that stuff up, because they do particularly injuries, keep it tight-lipped. But if you're around the team enough, and the guys covering the team now, who I respect, are, will get to the story eventually. But you gotta be there, and you gotta, this is why, it's important to have that access and get to know these guys, so that they can trust you or not trust you. But just being around, you just learn a lot more. And one time, believe it or not, the paper, when this is in 95, maybe, team was going really bad, and my boss said, "Look, take a week, don't write anything, just go be with the team for a week, find out what's really going on." And I was amazed that, if you are around and are trusted, people will tell you stuff on background that will help you. And that particular, this is one of the wildest Shark stories ever. On opening night of that season, the front office was in disarray. Dean Lombardi was one of, they called it the three-headed monster. They didn't have a general manager, but Lombardi had some title. Art Savage had a title, and he was kind of the business guy, but he was one of the three guys. They all reported to George Gunn. It was a terrible setup. And Chuck Grillo, who was the chief scout and not the best guy. All right. Well, it turned out Grillo had been backbiting Lombardi, and Lombardi found out that he got some of Grillo's emails criticizing Lombardi. In other words, Grillo wanted to run the whole team. And so he was criticizing Lombardi in these emails he sent to the owner, and somebody sent the copies of those emails to Lombardi, and Lombardi blew up. This is opening day, the day of opening night. Okay.
Yeah, that's the type of news you want to be out there on opening night for sure.
Yeah, Lombardi just blows up and says, "I effing quit," and he drives home. He goes home, and may have a drink or two, and gets even more upset. So on opening night, as the fans are streaming in, George Gunn, the owner, and Art Savage, who was the team president, in addition to be one of the three-headed monster guys that was running the team, they have to leave the arena as fans are streaming in and drive to Lombardi's house and talk him out of quitting. And so that set the tone for that season. This was the 91. It was the season where Kevin Constantine got fired.
Yeah, I believe that was one of the worst.
In front of Patty's Inn, which is another story where I know Lombardi says, "Let's go for a drive," and they get off down there in front of Patty's Inn, and Lombardi starts talking, and Kevin goes, "Are you firing me? Because if you're firing me, I'll just get out right now, out of the car." And Lombardi goes, yeah, we feel we need to make a change. And Kevin Constantine gets out of he was, the coach, the first Sharks playoff coach, right? He gets out of the car, and I think he walked into Patty's and had a beer and then cleaned out his office and left. But you learn that stuff by getting people to trust you, right? And and trust you to tell their stories correctly and with some sensitivity. And so I felt very fortunate that a number of players and coaches, even in the most tense times, when Ron Wilson left, his last words to me, because I'd written something that said, it's probably time for the Sharks to think about finding a new coach. And but you always show up the next day, right? You don't run away from it.
Mm-hmm.
And so so Ron and I pretty much had it out in his office, and the last words he said to me were "F you," and I think the last words I said to him were, "Well, F you too," right?
Mm-hmm.
And the next time I saw him, I think was at the Olympics in Vancouver. Would that match up right? And he was coaching the USA team, and he walks into the room. It's like a press conference, and he walks in, and I'm in the front row, and he sits down. And he looks at me, and I look at him, and he gives me a wink and a smile, right? because we get it, right? This is part of the deal. And then after the press conference, he's got guys around him, and hi Mark, hi Ron, and then he says, you Toronto guys, Mark, I tell all these Toronto guys, the San Jose writers knew a lot more about hockey than they do. And the Toronto writers turned to go like,
that's
what?
hilarious.
Yeah, after Ron and I had parted on not so friendly terms, but he and I are Facebook friends now, and it's what make covering hockey interesting, right? And,
it comes with the territory without a doubt.
Yeah, and I don't miss the day-to-day stuff, but you do miss, kind of having some of those relationships, talking with guys about whatever they're, Nabby and I, he's a really bright guy and could talk politics. He could talk books, and we'd have really good conversations about stuff other than hockey. And I'm glad he's still connected to the team too. What was the question? I'm sorry.
That was the question. I was asking you to tell me anything about, what it was like to be with some of the greatest players in franchise history.
Yeah.
And you didn't just talk about, the status quo, the legends like Thornton and Marlowe, but you not name drop, that's a bad way of saying it, but you definitely brought it back. That's for sure. With a lot of these names that some Sharks fans have, some of the newer Sharks fans may not be familiar with, but I know a lot of those names that you mentioned are still, dear to me as a fan, not just in memory, but in my heart. Yeah. Really quick, Mark, do you mind if I stick around just a little bit longer? I want to take a quick break. I want to do a quick word from my people here, and then we'll be back in like 90 seconds. Is that
sure? I'll try not to ramble on when we come back.
We're loving it. We're loving all the content here. I am Aaron James. I am joined with very special guest, the legendary Mark Purdy. This is the Unfiltered Conversation on San Jose Sharks Hockey, courtesy of the Hockey Podcast Network and Shark City Hockey. We'll be right back. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back in 90 seconds. Customers download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code THPN. Bet just $5 to score $150 in bonus bets instantly. That's code THPN only at DraftKings Sportsbook. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. In Massachusetts, call 800-327-5050 or visit gamblinghelplinema.org. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369. In Kansas, call 1-800-522-4700. On behalf of Boot Hill Casino and Resort in West Virginia, gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit www.1800gambler.net. All games regulated by the West Virginia Lottery. Please play responsibly. In partnership with Hollywood Casino at Charlestown Races in Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. 21 and over in most eligible states, but age varies by jurisdiction. See DraftKings.com/sportsbook for details and state-specific responsible gambling resources. Bonus bets expire 7 days after issuance, 1 boost per eligible game. Opt-in required. Max bet $50. 10+ leg required for 100% boost. Eligibility, wagering, and deposit restrictions apply. Terms at sportsbook.draftkings.com/baseball terms. Welcome back, everybody, to Shark City Unfiltered. I am having a great conversation right now with the legendary Sounds Like Sharks columnist for the Merc. That is Mark Purdy. Be sure to follow him on Twitter at Merc Purdy. That's Merc as in the Mercury News. Purdy as in Mark Purdy. So, Mark, fans would generally agree that the last couple of seasons have been the worst in Sounds Like Sharks history. Okay.
Yes.
So,
Well, other than the second season.
right. So I was about to say, however, there have been quite a few seasons that I could think of that were more painful than being in the bottom four of the NHL standings.
Yeah.
There were also better Sharks teams that I can think of other than the 2016 Western Conference champs. So
I agree with that also.
Excluding the Cup Finals year in 2016, which season stand out to you as being some of the most disappointing and most inspiring in Sharks history?
Okay. Well, when you were covering the team, Aaron, the question was always like, well, do you praise them for all the regular season triumphs they had, and for a while there was a point where the Sharks had won more playoff games than any other NHL team over that 10-year period, but they'd also lost more playoff games than any other team over that same 10-year period, right? And so do you praise them for the games they won, or do you criticize them for the games they lost? The answer is you do both, right? You salute them for their success, and you criticize them for their failures. In terms of I asked, it's funny you brought that up, and we're just talking about Evgeny Nabokov. Obviously everyone would point to the President's Trophy winning season, right? Was that 2009? I don't have the record.
2008, 2009. That's mine.
And
that's
that was the best team in hockey in the regular season, and they should have certainly gone farther than the first round and getting beat by Anaheim, right? But Nabby, a stand-up guy. I remember after that playoff elimination, Anaheim came into the season on a roll, and they were tough out, but the Sharks still should have beat them. But he at least stood up and said, we stink, right? We couldn't do this. And it was interesting. Rob Blake was he the captain of that? I think he was the captain of that team. And I said, what's the deal? And his answer was a good one. And he said, that we're playing as well as we did in the regular season, but there are not enough guys in this room that realize that's not good enough, right? That you need to raise it a level, and not enough guys in the room realize that, you can be as good as you were in the regular season, and we were really good, but you can't. That is not going to cut it in the playoffs. You still got to raise your game. Mm-hmm. So that was a bitter one. I asked Nabby again, Nabokov once about which of the teams did he think should have won the Stanley Cup of all the teams? Which of the team? And he pointed to one. And again, you're going to have to help me, Aaron, on the exact year, but it was the year that they lost to Colorado when Timo Solani was on the team, and they had an open net against Patrick Roy and missed it. Do you remember this?
That, I believe, was 2002, 2003.
Okay.
Because the following year in 2003, 2004, the Sharks went to the conference championship for the first time, and they eliminated the Colorado Avalanche in the second round.
Right. But Nabby thought that first time they played Colorado, that he thought that was the team that could have gone all the way. And the fact that, Solani missed that net, after which I started to refer to him for a while as Team Miss Solani, which he didn't like and probably shouldn't have liked. He thought that was the team that could have gone. And that was pre-Thornton.
Right.
But they had Vince Stamfus, Owen Nolan, of course, and Owen. There's another really interesting guy, from Northern Ireland and all that, and I'm happy to say, he and I didn't always see eye to eye while he was playing. Since then, whenever I see him, it was great. I covered him at the Olympics too when he won a gold medal for Salt Lake City. But anyway, at Salt Lake City. But that I went back and looked, and you know what, Nabby might be right. Maybe that should have been the team. I would always say that, and this did not make Doug Wilson happy. I would always say, remember there was a strike one year, and there was no Stanley Cup playoffs, right?
04, 05.
Maybe that was the year the Sharks were supposed to win, right?
I feel the same. I really do.
That was certainly a lost opportunity. And Doug would say, "Oh no, you can't, say that." I said, "Well, how do you know? Somebody was going to win that year. It could have been you. That could have been you."
We're knocking on the doorstep.
So that isn't that weird? The best chance they had to win might have been the year that they didn't play the playoffs. They didn't have a Stanley Cup playoffs. But I still think, on pure talent alone, that 09 team was the best team, but that was regular season. And I concede to Nabby, that was a hell of a team that should have beat the Avalanche that year, because that if Solani puts that puck in that net, they win that series most likely.
Mm-hmm.
There was still time left, but so those two, and I think you have to say the 09 defeat was the most disappointing, but there were so many others. And what about the year? Remember, they were really good. There's another, of course, they were really good for a lot of years, a lot of seasons. And they end up falling behind to Dallas in the playoffs, and then they were eliminated in that 3 overtime playoff game in Dallas.
I want to say that was 2008 or 9.
Yeah. Jeremy Roenick was on the team. There was another character. And I've had many of not just Shark players, but guys that played for Dallas that I would run into, or people, or who was coaching Dallas. That was, I think, game 6, right?
Mm-hmm.
The consensus among both, among a lot of the players who played in that game on both sides, was that the Sharks had won that 3 overtimes, won that game. They would have come home and won game 7. The Dallas guys would have, the Dallas guys thought that. And so but they lost that series because they would have this maddening habit, Aaron, of like one game a series, they would just like kind of not show up, right? They just give away a game. You can't do that in the playoffs. You can't. Maybe that's too severe to not show up, but they didn't treat it like a playoff game. Again, they treated it like a regular season game. They'd get like a 2-0 lead in the series, or 3-1 lead in a series, and then just say, "Wow!" And of course, I haven't even mentioned the the series of shame where they get ahead of the Kings 3-0 and then end up blowing that. I guess, do we have to put that at the top? Is that your personal top? Because I think
personally, top 3 for sure, because I went to every single home game of that series, and I did not expect the outcome to be that way. I will be 100 with you.
Yeah.
You struck all the right chords in terms of like my teams, because I just want to touch back on that President Trophies team, because it was an amazing season. The Sharks got 117 points. It was Todd McCullen's first year.
Right.
He came from the Red Wings, and I believe they were off. Like, they started 23-1. Like, they were just on a roll, and then they had 6 players with 20 or more goals.
Yeah, it was an amazing team. They were so much fun to watch.
Nabokov was a beast in net that year. I think he went like 30 or plus consecutive starts, but I know he had 41 wins and 7 shutouts. Yeah. Like, honestly, that President Trophy team, I thought was going to be the one. For me, that is most disappointing. For me, the most inspiring. And again, I know a lot of Sharks fans, just to remind everybody from being in conversation, we're excluding the 2016 Western Conference champs. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yes,
by definition, that's
absolutely.
I think maybe the most inspiring. Being in there, were you at the clinching game against St. Louis that sent them to the finals?
In person, no, I was not fortunate
Uh,
enough to secure a ticket.
okay. Well, that was really great to be in that arena that night. I'm sorry you weren't there, but there'll come a time, Aaron. It'll happen again. I don't know when. It'll happen again.
I believe we're closer than a lot of people may make it out to seem.
Well, I'm not sure about that.
I
But
mean, as terms of do I expect it to happen within the next 2 seasons? Perhaps not.
no.
But that's because our our core key players are not ready yet.
Right.
I trust Mike Grier's plan. I'm excited to have Mike Grier on board,
Yeah.
just because we've been through this is the first time in almost 20 years. I know I'm rounding up, being a little generous there, that we've had a new guy, taking the car for a ride, so to speak.
Right. Well, Mike is a bright guy. I remember when he played for the Sharks, a very responsible guy. Then when they did get eliminated, he was always accountable and stood up. And I remember asking him one day, we were just, I don't know, we were just talking, or I was doing an interview, and I said, hey, are you interested in coaching when you're done here? Because obviously, you see the game really intelligently, and did you ever think about becoming a coach? He was, when you're covering a team in any sport, you can kind of identify the guys. Like, I'm convinced Joe Pavelski will be a coach one day. He just sees the game that way, and Greer's the same way. And he said, no, I don't want to be a coach. I'm not that kind of guy. Well, clearly, Aaron, I asked him the wrong question, right? I never asked him, would you see yourself as a general manager one day? Maybe he would have said yes. Then I would have had the scoop, right? But I do think this. I think at some point Mike needs to have a, sit down with the writers or if it's a fan thing, and kind of lay out as much as he can, his exact plan, right? Here's how he sees things. Here's how I think it will work, right? You can tell by the moves he's making sort of what he's thinking, but I believe fans deserve that. And Doug was always, I thought, very accessible to fans. I know there were a lot of feelings, positive and negative, about Doug, but I think he was always accessible to fans and would try to explain his thinking on certain things. And he would sit down with me, and I would say, well, what do you see the team looking like in 3 or 4 years? And he would lay out his general plan. So I think Mike needs to do that, but certainly deserves a chance to put together something. I don't know. How do you feel about the whole Carlson thing? Do you want to see him play here next season or not? I want to see him play. I'm buying tickets. I want to see that.
I would like to see Erik Karlsson in the San Jose Sharks sweater. Don't get me wrong. However, I believe that it's apparent what he wants to do at this point in his career. I was all for him. I supported him. I don't even know if the Sharks or if the league is even prepared to take on a contract like that.
Right.
Personally,
well, I think if you're going to trade him, I think I anticipate what you're going to say, but go ahead and finish.
By all means, I would love to hear what you have to think about it.
Well, I think what you're going to say is, if he can bring value back to the Sharks, that helps them in their build up to whatever's next. That's good, and I think that's true. But I would hold on to him through the trade deadline next season for a number of reasons. One is, I think, well, first of all, you'll be paying much more of his salary, so whichever team takes him on won't have most of 1 year. They won't have to pay. And secondly, some team would probably pay more if they really think they're on the cusp, and then you could send them to a team you definitely know is on the cusp. That should make him happy. And I mean, now they're in this crazy position where, so they have this guy that won the Norris Trophy. He's your top star on your team, and fans, if he might not be here on opening night for them to cheer, right? That's interesting. So I'd like to see him. I enjoy watching him play a lot. It's fun. Can be maddening at times because he's always going to try to make the hardest play possible. And sometimes that doesn't work. When it does work, it's spectacular, but it's really fun to watch. And I guess I'd like to see him at least start the season in San Jose, just to give fans a chance to do that, and also maybe it would give him a chance to get more back. Now, if somebody hands Greer a deal he can't turn down, he can't turn it down. But I don't think they're going to get that, do you, with the salary that you have to pay that guy? And unless the Sharks have to give up some of their money, which then that creates a whole other situation.
Right. Okay, so I'm split. I always supported EK65 even when it wasn't popular. I'm just going to say that right now. But to me, I feel like, and this is just from a spectator, I'm a fan and nothing more. It seems, one, that the culture that Mike Greer is building is, first and foremost, the guys that are in the dressing room or on the squad, they have to want to be there. You could see that this past season, his first year, because we're celebrating his first year as being announced as the general manager today, actually. You could see that that's been the case. You've had like Brent Burns walk in, ask for a trade. The captain of the San Jose Barracuda, at least this is on Joe Will's side, he was traded apparently for personal reasons. I'm not going to get too far into all the names because there's more players out there, but the point I'm trying to get at, though, is it seems like Mike Greer wants to make sure that the guys that are wearing teal want to be wearing teal. At least that's the impression I'm getting. And his door is always open for those who, are requesting a trade. Brent Burns probably being the biggest example of that. Now, Carlson, I don't know if this is just trying to sell a piece, get some clicks or whatnot, but apparently he has formally requested a trade. I don't know if that's been confirmed.
Well, I no, he said publicly that he would like to go to a team that had a chance to win the cup.
Right.
But if I were okay, but then the question becomes, okay, so if you're paying your hard-earned money to go see a Sharks team next season in the early part of the season, where are the goals going to come from? Where's the offense going to come from, right? And are you willing to pay your NHL prices to see them struggle that way? I mean, with Carlson, at least, and there, I think there is some value to having him around. He's a professional, and okay, I don't think he hates playing here. I think he wants to go somewhere where he can win a Stanley Cup. And if you tell him, look, if you start the season here, we get to the trade deadline, and if things are the way all of us expect them to be at the trade deadline, we'll do the best we can to get you to a team that for sure is on the cusp. I mean, you could trade him to a team now that thinks it's on the cusp of winning a Stanley Cup, and next season, doesn't go anywhere for him. Right. Whereas if you wait, then by March, right? Which 5 or 6 teams have the best chance, and you could maybe send in one of those teams instead of sending them to, I don't know, name a team. Let's say Florida, right? Let's say it's Florida. Okay, well, Florida made the finals this year, right? That's so they're good, but what if a couple of their guys get hurt, and so now you trade them to Florida, and then their season goes south. No pun there, but so now he's on a team that doesn't have a chance anyway, right? So if you wait, I think he would play hard, and I think he kind of enjoys being the guy that the younger players look up to, and I think I don't know. Well, that said, if the Pittsburgh Penguins offer the Sharks, a number 1 draft pick and one of their better young players, and maybe 2 of them, then you got to think about it. But I don't think that's what I don't think that's what teams are going to offer. Do you, given that salary?
No, as a matter of fact, and again, I don't even know if they'll have a full disclosure as to like how much the salary cap will increase. But from my understanding is there are some whispers out there saying that perhaps the Sharks are kind of waiting to see what the cap situation is going to look like going into the future. This way they could kind of have a better, I guess the most generic way of saying is a better grip on like who they could actually do business with.
Yeah, that could be. And I respect what you're saying also about, Greer wants guys who want to be with the team. But, my observation about Erik Karlsson, who incidentally, I should add, I only talked to once, and it was when he was with Ottawa, right? So I've been retired since 2017, but I could tell he's a professional, right? The team the Sharks weren't going anywhere last season. And look at the season he had because he's a pro, and he shows up and tries to earn his money, which is what professionals do. I think as long as you hold out that, as you have seems like Greer does have open dialogue with these guys and explain, look, at the trade deadline, we'll take care of you the best we can. I don't know. I think
it sounds logical and rational. As a matter of fact, I wouldn't be surprised if he was skating in a San Jose Sharks uniform, because that contract situation, first you got to find, the interested party and, the correct suitor. And then, like you said, there's just so many unknowns. So it does make sense to maybe keep him around for a while, which I honestly, I feel like maybe 75 to 80% of the noise out there surrounding trade rumors around Karlsson is exactly what it is. It's just rumors.
And it's fun. It's fun to talk about. But
absolutely.
But plus, if I'm going to pay money to see the Sharks play next season, it'll be fun to see some of the younger guys. But you also want to see, the Norris Trophy winner, for Christ's sake.
Exactly, right? The main event, the main card.
If you're marketing this team in terms of, he's your top attraction.
So I'll tell you what Sharks fans will miss if they don't have an Erik Karlsson on the ice next season. They'll miss a defensive player who has the ability to extend the play. He has the ability and the awareness to create opportunities where other defensemen were unable to. He could read the ice, so he could switch between defense and offense with his line mates. That kind of dynamic play is what got him the Norris Trophy, because I know a lot of people like to talk about that plus-minus rating.
As you know, because I mean, you got to subtract all the minus numbers because he was on the ice for every empty net goal that was scored against the Sharks at the end of every game, right?
I do have a particular stance against that, but that's for another time.
Okay, but if he's on the ice at the end of every game, they lost a lot of games.
Yes, they did.
That he was on the ice for, because he was on the ice at the end of all these games that the empty net goals were scored. So,
just want to respond really quick in terms of like where we would pick up in terms of who's going to score the goals. Well, I'm looking forward to that being, that responsibility being inherited first and foremost by Tomas Hertl. He wasn't where he should have been last season, and I'm pretty sure he's looking forward to getting out there and putting the productivity, earning that new ink on that contract he got last season, as well as these new kids they'll be plugging in. I'm expecting Bordelot hopefully to make the lineup, but William Eklund without a doubt is going to be on the ice. And I'm excited to see what these these young kids are going to bring.
Me too.
Yeah, I think the Shark Tank, believe it or not, I think it'll start to turn around. I don't know how soon or how fast, but I always believe that the Sharks have a chance. And I personally, I know statistics and everything may say, analytics may go against what I'm about to claim, but I feel like the Sharks will be at the very least in a wild card, if not Stanley Cup, contending for divisional spot, divisional championship in the Stanley Cup, and in the Stanley Cup playoffs, pardon me, sooner rather than later. I want to say maybe max 2 to 3 seasons, max. I don't anticipate.
Well, I think that matches up. As I say, I run into some of the Sharks people around town, both players and front office people. And I think when you talk to them, just on background, they know I'm not writing anymore. They're looking at 2 to 3 years before they're really, contending to maybe even be in the playoffs again. But here's the other thing, Aaron. What if Karlsson comes back and some of these guys are, there was a time when I remember that one season when they thought the Sharks weren't going to be good, and that was when. Guys like Chichu and this is, you're talking to a 71-year-old guy here. Who was the guy, the really good young Czech player, and they traded him to Ottawa as part of the my roster. Anyway, they had Marco Sturm came up, and like all these guys kind of came up, and they had a much better season than people thought. So what if Karlsson comes back and now it's January, February, and they're still within, a few points of the playoff thing, right? So
Mhm.
that's possible.
Yeah,
Possible.
absolutely.
Not maybe really likely, but it's possible.
We can dream. We can dream.
Well, yeah, I mean, you don't know with these guys, right? You just don't
Yeah.
know. I mean, I want to believe Eklund will be able to score goals, but I don't know. Bordeaux's not a real big guy. Somebody will take a run at him, I guarantee you.
Yeah, without a doubt.
And we'll see how he responds to that. And if Carlson leaves, then who runs your power play?
Hmm. Yeah, he's definitely the
I'm asking
quarterback
you,
of
Aaron,
that.
who runs the power play?
I don't have an answer for you right now because he is the man. I mean,
Yeah,
he's
yeah.
involved in almost
And plus,
every freaking scoring goal this season. I forgot the
but and we
percentages.
and we haven't even talked about the goalie situation. So,
Yeah, that's
yeah.
yeah. We have
So
Mackenzie Blackwood, supposedly Capo Kakinen, and E2 Makininemi. I'm hoping gets an opportunity, but yeah, there's a lot of questions going into the season.
yeah,
Who could step in and take the role of Carlson? I'm hoping Mario Ferraro will be the guy. I'm pretty sure a lot of us are hoping he'd be the one, but he's
yeah.
been kind of been struggling himself. But only time will tell. Maybe we get back together in midway through the season and have another discussion on where they're at. But I got two more questions for you tonight, Mark.
Yeah, okay. I'll try to be quick because
Yeah,
I know people want to move on with their lives.
I could talk to you as long as you would like, sir.
No, that's
But
fine. Let's make this quick. Let's make it
all
quick.
right. So just briefly, really quick. So you spent your career around Mr. Sounds a Shark, but
Yeah.
there's also Mr. Hockey. What was it like? What was the experience like meeting Gordie Howe in the penalty box?
Oh, you know that story? Or did you read that story? Or how did you know about that story?
Because I'm a fan, Mark.
Okay. Well, God bless you. Yeah, well, that was when I was working in Cincinnati too. And the Cincinnati had a WHA franchise, the Old World Hockey Association, which eventually folded 4 teams into the NHL: Hartford, Edmonton, Winnipeg, and what was the fourth one? Help me out. Quebec. So they were desperate to have anything written about them, those teams. Cincinnati Stingers, in a town where there were Major League Baseball, the Reds, and the NFL, the Bengals, and the big college basketball. So I said, well, I'd like to write a column once where I could just go sit in the penalty box for a night, just to see, watch the game from there and see how that is. And the Stingers were cool with that. So I ended up sitting in the penalty box for this game. It just so happened the Stingers and I were playing the Houston Aeros, and Gordie Howe is on the Houston Aeros. And of course, Gordie Howe gets in trouble, goes in the penalty box, comes to the penalty box, sits down, and looks at me and goes like, "Who are you?" And I explained, "Well, I'm here writing a column about it." And he just kind of goes, "Yeah, okay." It was so loose. But what's interesting was, during the breaks in play, the referee comes over and they're talking to Gordie. Gordie must have been in his late 40s, early 50s then, and they're talking about, well, this restaurant, I like this restaurant in this town. Where are you going to eat afterwards, right? But a very pleasant experience with Gordie Howe in the penalty box, who, as you know, great trivia question, right? Who was the first hockey player to wear a Sharks jersey, a Sharks sweater? It was Gordie Howe. Did you know this?
Yes, he was in Cupertino, I believe.
Right. Yes, exactly. Great question. And Gordie, that was a memorable experience just because of the circumstances. But he was always very pleasant to be around. I wouldn't want to go in the corners against him, but he was Mr. Hockey. He really was Mr. Hockey, much as Patrick Marleau was Mr. Shark, right?
Mm-hmm.
He was Mr. Hockey. That was a fun column to write. The Bin of Sin. I think that's what I put on as the headline: a night in the bin of sin. And because other stuff happened too, but never expect one of the greatest players in the world to suddenly be sitting in the penalty box alongside
Right.
and the penalty box attendant, right?
Okay, Mark. So
what's the other question?
Before we conclude the show, this is the last question, all right? I would like to ask you, after a 33-year career at the Merc, where you provided coverage on 14 Olympics, 32 Super Bowls, was named one of America's top 10 sports columnists by the Associated Press and the Wall Street Journal,
Yeah.
Along with your colleagues in the 1990s, we mentioned top of the program, you won the Pulitzer Prize in General News Reporting for coverage of the 1989 Loma Prieta World Series earthquake, and of course, all those memories and the columns of Los Tiburones. Can you share what it means to be the first journalist to be inducted in the San Jose Sports Hall of Fame?
Oh my! Well, thank you for mentioning all that. I'm generally a modest guy who understands my place in the world, but I'm proud of the career I had. I'm pretty sure I don't belong in the San Jose Sports Hall of Fame with all these great athletes that are in there, including Archer Zerbe, including, I'm sure, and Patrick Marleau is going to go in this year, and Owen Nolan, and Bill Walsh and John Elway and all these other guys. I'm damn sure I don't deserve to be in that Hall of Fame with them, but I'm not giving back the plaque.
As a matter of fact, for those watching, let's switch that graphic so they can see it right here.
Yeah, it was very nice. It was it was really nice for my family. They had to put up a heck of a lot, with the travel of my job and so forth. People in this valley work hard. I know you work hard. Everybody works hard. So I never like to say my job was harder or tougher than anyone else, but there were demands on it, and particularly involving time away from home, that my family had to really deal with, and was just stellar in the way they did, allowed me to have the career I did. So that night was really great for my family, when the night of the induction. And it's funny, I walk around the arena, and whenever I go walk by that plaque, I just kind of hide my head. People have to look at my mug. Oh man. But anyway, thank you for bringing that up. I because I am proud of the career I had, but I couldn't. You know what? I mean this sincerely. I could not have had it without the readers. Anybody that spent 5 minutes to read any single one of my columns, I appreciated that. I never took it for granted. It was great to build a relationship with readers here, where they trusted me to tell them stories and tell them what was going on. And I will always cherish that. I still live in San Jose. I still run into readers around town. Always enjoy talking to them. If you see me, come up, particularly if you're wearing a Los Tiburones jersey. Love to talk to you. So thanks.
Yes, thank you for your time, Mark. To the audience, this has been an unfiltered conversation about San Jose Sharks hockey with the legendary Sharks columnist Mark Purdy. You can follow Mark on Twitter at Merc Purdy. That's Merc like the Mercury News, and Purdy for Mark Purdy. Again, follow him on Twitter at MERCPURDY, where you can find risky opinions on demand.
That's right.
Mark, thank you for your time tonight.
It was a lot of fun, man. Thank you.
Thank you. You have a great rest of your evening. And to the rest of y'all out there in Sharks territory, till next time, I'm Aaron James, and this has been Shark City Unfiltered. Good night, everyone.